Good afternoon, Professor. My name is Dirk Patel, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to speak you today about a topic that not only captures the intersection of cybersecurity and surveillance, but also profoundly challenges our understanding of law, ethics, and the integrity of the democratic governance. So, the subject of today's presentation is Pegasus spyware. Its legal, ethical, and security perspectives. This is not just a piece of software uh, but also a powerful surveillance tool developed by the Israeli cyber intelligence firm NSO Group. On paper, its purpose is legitimate to assist governments in tracking terrorists, criminals, and other threats to national security. That's what Pegasus makes so dangerous. Not just its capability, but also the fact that it hides behind the shield of democracy and legitimacy. However, since its discovery, this tool has been linked to surveillance of activists, journalists, political opponents, lawyers, and even heads of states. It was meant to be used under strict conditions, but yet evidence shows that it has been deployed in ways that are incompatible with the rule of law, civil liberties, and democratic accountability. This presentation is designed to connect the dots, not just what Pegasus is, but what it reveals about the broader ecosystem of unregulated digital surveillance. We will look at where the laws are falling short, why ethics must work alongside technology, and what roles international bodies governance must play. So the story of Pegasus is not confined to one nation or one incident, but it is also a global issue that requires a very huge global response. So moving to the third slide. So what exactly a Pegasus is? So a Pegasus is classified as a spyware, but that label doesn't quite do it justice. This is a state-of-the-art cyber weapon. It was developed with the capabilities of infiltrate and even the most secure smartphones without the user ever clicking a link or opening a file. This is what is known as a zero-day exploit. Once the spyware is installed on a device, the operator gains full administrative access. That means they can monitor messages, intercept calls, and even track GPS locations, and even activate the device microphone and camera. It is all done without the user's acknowledgement and permission. The infected device then becomes a live surveillance tool in the hands of the attacker. Pegasus is developed for the stealth, and it is also designed that the target never knows it's there. There are no pop-ups, no system shutdowns, or not even red flags. This invincibility makes it one of the most powerful and dangerous surveillance tools that have developed, and also that it targets the main endpoint, the project itself or the phone itself. It can even bypass all encrypted apps like WhatsApp and Signal. The encryption doesn't matter if you are reading the messages before they are encrypted or not. Now, let's think about that this means in real world scenarios. Let's suppose like journalists communicating with sources, lawyers, defending sensitive clients, activists organizing against authorization government, all of them becomes vulnerable. Pegasus doesn't discriminate based on guilt or innocence. It also simplify operates based on the agenda of whoever holds the license. So my the first password is tree tops. Now moving ahead, the software is sold by NSO Group exclusively to state actors under the premise of lawful use. But lawful becomes a slippery term when authoritarian regimes or politically motivated actors use it as for a cover of repression. This leads us into the next layer, like how technically it works and why it's nearly impossible to stop once it's being deployed. So moving to the next slide, what are the technical capabilities? So from a technical standpoint, it operates on a level that most traditional cybersecurity tools can't detect or counter. The spyfall installs itself at the kernel level of the mobile device, the core of the device OS, like operating system. At this level, it can gain root access, which means that it has the highest level of administrative privileges possible. It doesn't just act like an app, but it also becomes a part of phone's feature and fabric. To gain access, Pegasus uses zero-day vulnerabilities. These are some flaws in software that are unknown to the soft vendors, and therefore it's unpatched and unprotected. These vulnerabilities are highly prized in the cybersecurity world, often sold on black markets for millions of dollars. NSO Group has demonstrated the ability to identify and exploit these vulnerabilities, staying ahead of even major tech companies like Apple and Google. So one of Pegasus' most advanced feature is zero-click capability. Like unlike traditional phishing, where victims must click a link or even download a file, Pegasus can infiltrate a device slightly or silently through something as simple as missed call on WhatsApp or a silent push notification. The user doesn't need to interact it all. This removes the traditional defenses that rely on user awareness and vigilance. Additionally, Pegasus has also this feature like self-destruct, uh, for like meaning if it defect detects any forensic analysis or the possibility of discovery, it can erase itself remotely, and it also leaves no trace virtually. It can also avoid detection by hiding in temporary memory or using dynamic command and control servers. For forensic analysts, when tracking and confirmation Pegasus infection is like finding a shadow in the dark. These capabilities make Pegasus a favorite among intelligence agencies, but also a nightmare for civil society. And it's the discovery of these capabilities in action that brought global attention to NSO groups and its clients. So, what about the discovery? So, the relevance of Pegasus' existence and use, it didn't come through a conventional reporting. It all began in 2016, where an Emirati human rights and activities named Ahmad Mansour received suspicious text messages, and it promised that information about torture victims sensing danger. So he forwarded the text to the Citizen Lab, a research group at the University of Toronto. So that lab partnered with the Lookout Security, and what they uncovered was startling and advanced surveillance tool that could demonstrate an iPhone use using a single tap. This was the first public documentation of Pegasus, but it was only the beginning. So fast forward to 2021, a collaborative investigation known as the Pegasus Project, coordinated by Forbidden Stories and Amnesty Internationally, it gained access to a leaked list of over 50,000 phone numbers, believed it was believed to be interest of a client of NSO group. This included not only criminals but also activities, politicians, academics, and journalists from around the globe. The forensic evidence was damning. Like the Amnesty's security lab confirmed that this kind of injections on the dozens of phones, it belonged to people with no criminal background. This blew the doors of on the open on the scale of surveillance. Like this wasn't just a niche espionage tool, but it was a globally developed system of covert monitoring. With this discovery, this issue escalated from cybersecurity circles into the international legal and political arena. The question shifted from what is Pegasus to who is using it and for what purpose. The question would lead to a global fallout. So moving to the political consequences of the topic, so it didn't unfold in a vacuum. They reverted through legislative chambers, courtrooms, and newsrooms around the globe. And once it became evident that this tool had been used not only for criminal investigations but also for political surveillance. But the public trust in government institutions began to erode rapidly. So in India, the Pegasus scandal became a flashpoint for democratic accountability. Allegations that Pegasus was used to surveil opposition, politicians, election officials, and also journalists during the election seasons. It led to nationwide protest, also legal petitions and fierce parliamentary debates. The opposition parties accused that the ruling government were of use, like it was they were using Pegasus as a tool of state sponsored against its own citizens. The use wasn't just about the surveillance, it was all about whether the democratic checks and balances were being dismantled through digital means. So the Indian government, Indian Supreme Court stepped in to assert judicial authority over the executive's surveillance powers. In a landmark move, it set up an independent committee to investigate the use of Pegasus. The moment was a significant because it was one of the most first times a top court in a major democracy formally acknowledged the potentially misuse of spyware by the state against its citizens. Also, like in the Middle East, in Israel, where NSO Group is headquartered, the political implications were equally significant. The Israeli government, which had previously licensed Pegasus exports under the guise of national interest, was being forced to reassess its whole policy. International scrutiny also compelled Israeli officials to restrict Pegasus licensing to a narrower list of approved governments. This represented a critical shift from not just a reputational cost of NSO, but also a revolution of the role of state oversight in cyber surveillance exports. But in internationally, the diplomatic fallout led to a serious discussions about a digital sovereignty and surveillance diplomacy. Also, France demanded that answers from Morocco, while the EU discussed the need for stronger surveillance and technological regulations. The European Parliament launched a special inquiry committee known as PEGA to investigate the abuse of surveillance tools within the EU member states. The legal battle still followed. Tech giants like Apple and Meta, a parent company of WhatsApp, filed a lawsuit against NSO Group. I think seeking financial and relief from for unauthorized intrusions into their platforms. These lawsuits were groundbreaking. They marked for the first time private companies with a global influence were directly challenged a surveillance a vendor in court. Also, like Apple's lawsuit was particularly symbolic as it emphasized the protection of its user space against the state-sponsored digital operation. What became clear through all these political consequences is that Pegasus had not only exposed technological vulnerabilities, but it had exposed into institutional weaknesses. It revealed how government, often in secret, were bypassing the very legal and ethical standards they were expected to uphold. Also, like as we move forward, I think like we must now explore whether our legal systems are well equipped to respond to such challenges. The next section will focus on the legal frameworks that are currently govern and or fail to govern the use of commercial surveillance technologies like Pegasus. So this section will focus on the legal frameworks. Now that we have examined the political triggered by the Pegasus revelations, we must turn our focus into the legal domain. So my second password is garden. So, moving back to the legal frameworks, how has the law attempted to address or failed to address the rise of commercial spyware like Pegasus? What protection exists and where are the gaps? These are not the theoretical questions, they strike at the heart of whether democratic societies can meaningfully safeguard civil liberties in this digital age or not. So let us begin with the national laws at the national level. Like in many countries, legal frameworks governing surveillance were crafted decades ago, long before tools like Pegasus existed. They were built for an era of landline telephones and analog communications, not a zero-click exploits, but also with cross-border data flows. In Canada, surveillance is governed primarily by the Privacy Act, the Criminal Code, and the Communication Security Establishment Act. These laws outlines what government agencies can or can't do when monitoring individuals. However, they say little about foreign surveillance tools operating on a Canadian soil. This is a crucial gap. Pegasus, as we have seen, can be deployed by foreign states to monitor individuals in other jurisdictions. Without clear protection, Canadians remain vulnerable. Also, in the US, the legal toolkit includes the CFFA, the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, which criminalize unauthorized access to digital devices. There is also the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, aka FISA, which sets rules for intelligence gathering on non-citizens. Yet, even with these laws, an NSO group was able to operate freely until it was added to the US entity list. This indicates that the enforcement, not just legislation, but it is also a major weakness. The EU, European Union, has taken more aggressively steps. The GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation, is also considered the gold standard of data protection in globally. It places strict limitations on how personal data is collected, stored and used. But even GDPR is primarily focused on private sector data collection, not state surveillance. To address this, EU passed Regulation 2021/821, which governs the export of dual-use goods, including cyber surveillance tools. And under this regulation, member states must assess the human rights impact before it approves exports. In the UK's Investigative Powers Act also requires some jurisdictional approval for state relevance. It is one of the few laws that attempts to balance the operational secrecy with oversight. But again, laws are not only effective, but it is if the oversight mechanisms are strong, independent, and well funded. Otherwise, the laws become a shield, not a safeguard. Now let's look beyond the national borders, especially international law. Human rights treaties provides another layer of protection. The Article 17 of the International Convention on Civil and Political Rights, it guarantees that the individuals the right to policy. But here is the catch. The ICCPR lacks direct enforcement mechanism, and it also depends on the national governments to uphold and implement its provisions. In countries where surveillance is used to suppress dissent, this often doesn't happen. Even more concerning is the lack of binding global treaties specifically addressing spyware. The Wassenaar arrangement attempts to regulate the export of dual-use technologies. It also includes intrusion software, but the participation is voluntary and enforcement is uneven. The NSO group, for example, has continued selling the Pegasus soft spyware to regimes with a questionable human rights records. We are left with a patchwork of rules that national laws are outdated, quite outdated, international treaties that are toothless, and voluntary frameworks that rely heavily on good faith. This is what a legal scholars refer to as a normative gap, a disconnection between technological capability and legal accountability. So the legal question is not whether legal laws are exist, but whether they are adequate, enforced, and universally applied. Unfortunately, the answer is right now is no. But without legal clarity, ethical boundaries and become blurred, and the human rights are still left exposed. So because where the law is unclear, we turn ethics to ask like what is right, what is just, and what kind of world are we creating when we allow such tools to operate in the shadows. Moving to the so these are the some country specific regulation we just talked in the last slide about Canada, the states, European Union, and the United Kingdom. So moving to the ethical dilemmas. So, what are the ethical dilemmas? Like when law falls short, ethics becomes a more compass. The Pegasus case presents one of the most complex and urgent ethical challenges of our digital age. It compels us to ask what is acceptable in the name of national security, who defines legitimate surveillance, and who is held to responsible when ethical lines are crossed. At the core of this debate, the issue of informed consent, Pegasus operates without the target's acknowledge or approval. It also enters the digital space, their phone, conversations, private moments, etc. Second is the principle of proportionality. Ethical surveillance should be proportionate to the threat that it seeks to address. If Pegasus were used exclusively to track terrorists and prevent attacks, perhaps its existence should be morally justified. But what we have seen is deployment. It is against journalists, opposition leaders, and human rights advocates. Individuals who pose no violent threat but who challenge power. Then there is a question of accountability. NSO Group claims that it only sells Pegasus to government for lawful use. But when misuse occurs, NSO deflects responsibility, saying that it can't control how client operate the software. Furthermore, Pegasus threatens the democratic process. When political opponents or journalists are targeted, surveillance becomes a tool for silencing dissent rather than ensuring security. Then there is also the use of data dignity. Our personal data is an extension of our identity. It also violates the space without any due cause, dehumanize individually. So to wrap up this slide, in summary, the ethics of Pegasus are not just about intent. They are about consequence, transparency, and respect for human dignity. Until ethical standards are embedded in both the design and deployment of surveillance tools, we'll also continue to see technology outspacing morality. So let us now explore some what the role of international institutions are, especially the United Nations, and how it played in attempting to address these concerns. So this is my question 3 from Pegasus. So, alright, now let's dwell into a really important question that gets into the heart of international law. So, does targeting foreign diplomats with Pegasus spyware actually break any laws? The short answer is yes. But we have the Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Relations to prove it. Now, this treaty was signed in 1961 and is recognized by almost every country in the world. It basically says that uh, it basically says that diplomats, including ambassadors, ministers, and head of state, have certain protections when working abroad. That includes their personal safety, their private residence, and yes, their official communications. So the Article 22 and 27 of the treaty specifically says that diplomatic premises and official communications are inviolable. That means that they can't be searched, seized, or interfered with, and definitely not spied on. But that exactly what Pegasus spyware does. It bypasses encryption and even gets into devices very silently and gives the attacker full access to messages, emails, photos, and even live calls. When this is used on a foreign diplomat, it's not just about a security breach, it's an act of international misconduct. Now let's look at the some of the real world example. So in 2021, French President Emmanuel Macron was reported to one of the targets of Pegasus alleged by the Moroccan intelligence. His phone number showed up in the leaked Pegasus database, and while it wasn't just confirmed, if the spyware was successfully installed, it was big enough deal that France launched an official investigation. Similarly, in Spain, Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez and other high-level officials were found to have Pegasus infections. This led to diplomatic tension and even internal investigation on how and why this happened. From a legal point of view, this kind of digital intrusion goes way beyond unethical. It violates international treaties and sovereignty. Also, like according to the Article 2 of the UN Charter, countries must respect with each other's independence and avoid interference in domestic affairs. So, when one state uses a spyware against another's leaders, it could even be more considered a hostile act or cyber aggressions. And because these violations usually happen in secret, there is almost no opportunity for legal accountability or state level recourse, which makes it even more serious. So, to sum it up, when Pegasus is used against diplomats or head of states, it violates the Vienna Convention. It also breaches international trust and risks sparking diplomatic retaliation or even the at the international level. So this is my question C of for Pegasus, the international legal risk and institutional integrity. And also my last password is farming. So now let's talk about something that is just as crucial. The use of Pegasus spyware against lawyers, judges, or anyone involved in the justice system. This brings us to the second big question, like what happened to due process when spyware is used to monitor legal professionals. Think about this way. The right to fair trial isn't just a nice idea, but it is also a fundamental human right protected under international law. Article 14 of the International Convention on Civil and Political Rights in similar protections in Canada, Europe, and even in the States. It guarantees that anyone who is accused of a crime is like must entitled to a fair hearing by an impartial court. But that fairness collapses the moment one side gains secret access to a private legal information, especially through illegal spyware. But let's say a defense lawyer is advising their client and preparing a case, and if a government is secretly watching every message, reading their notes, or even listening their calls, what should one can do? How can that trial be fair? But it's like playing poker, and when the other side is reading your cards. Now, this doesn't about a theory. It also has happened in real life. Like in Poland, for example, Pegasus was reportedly used against Roman Giersch, a well-known lawyer who represented opposition politician. His phone was infected with the Pegasus. It was likely to allow authorities to track confidentially legal communication, and now that's a huge breach of attorney-client privilege. something that is supposed to be absolute sacred in any democratic legal system. The EU even stated that this kind of surveillance has no place in role of law society. Now let's not forget about judges. If judges feel that they are being monitored, how can they rule independently? Surveillance creates fear and it also introduces pressure. But in the worst case scenarios, it could even lead to manipulation or even with blackmail. What's worse is that most victims never even know they are being watched, or there is no chance to defend themselves, and also there is no way to challenge the evidence and also to restore the damage after it's done. So overall, Pegasus doesn't invade privacy. It also shakes the foundation of legal systems, interferes with the justice, and also removes the fairness and integrity that courts are supposed to represent. So these are my two questions. Moving to the next part of the United Nations response. So the global of for Pegasus demands a global response, and the natural place to look for the response is the United Nations. However, the role of UN in this context reveals both the potential and limitations. So, following the regulation Pegasus revelations, two UN special reporters, one on freedom for expression and other on extrajudicial killings, issued a joint statement. They called for global moderation on the scale, transfer, and use of surveillance technology. The UN has also repeated emphasized that digital privacy is a human right protected under the Article 17 of the International Convention on Civil and Political Rights. They However, enforcing that right is a challenge, and the UN can't prosecute if cannot find violators. It also relies on member state to internalize the implement international standards. There have been also efforts to push for binding treaty on surveillance on and human rights. So NGOs, academics, and some other government advocates for what's known as Digital Geneva Convention, a global legal framework to regulate cyber warfare and surveillance technology. But as of now, this remains aspirational. This brings to us one of the other international mechanism exists. The Wassenaar arrangement, while not in UN body, is an important multilateral government that seeks to control of the export of dual-use technologies. The Pegasus case has also shown that international law and structures are reactive and not proactive. So this brings us to one of the key justification often cited for technologies, national security. Now let's examine how government have justified the use of Pegasus and whether those justifications stand up to scrutiny. So next slide is about national security justifications. So what government are confronted about using Pegasus? The most common response is security. And to be clear, national security is a legitimate concern. States have a duty to protect their citizens from terrorism, organized crime, and foreign threats. But the question is, how far is too far? So, proponents of Pegasus argue that it has helped prevent terror plots, dismantle drug trafficking operations, and even rescue kidnapping victims. Moreover, the line between security and control become dangerously blurred when surveillance is used against non-violent actors. Another issue is the absence of judicial oversight. In democratic societies, surveillance is supposed to go through a legal process. It also warrants reviews and checks, but Pegasus can be deployed in secret with no public trace and often with minimal internal authorization. And there is the matter of proportionality. Is it necessary to deploy a military grade cyber weapon on someone who is suspected of leaking government documents or attending a protest? The danger is that the definition of threat becomes so elastic that it can apply to almost everyone in the state it wishes to monitor. Like in summary, the national security can't become a carte blanche for unrestricted surveillance. The security and liberty must coexist, and that balance can only be achieved through transparency and a strong oversight mechanism. To bring this concept into sharper focus, let us now examine some concrete case studies that demonstrate how Pegasus has been used and misused in the real world scenarios. So let's start with India. In 2021, allegations emerged that the Pegasus had been used to surveil political oppositions, figures, journalists, and activities. So notably, the phone numbers of Rahul Gandhi, a key opposition leader, were listed as potential targets. Also included were academics, lawyers, and even election officials. The government refused to confirm or deny its use of Pegasus, citing national security. So, moving to the next slide, it is about the case study on Mexico. So, it was one of the most first known clients of NSO groups. Under President Enrique Pena Nieto, Pegasus was used to surveil journalists reporting on cartel violence and government corruption. Even the families of murdered journalists were targeted. Despite public outcry and forensic confirmation, prosecutions have been slow and oversight remains weak. So another case study is about France and Saudi Arabia. So in France, the scandal reached to the highest levels of government. President Emmanuel Macron himself was identified as a potential target. France responded with an official investigation, a diplomatic warning to Morocco, a suspected NSO client, and a national review of cybersecurity infrastructure. These cases remained and raised concerns about international espionage and digital sovereignty within the Western democracies. Finally, in Saudi Arabia, a Pegasus was reportedly used to monitor individuals close to journalist Jamal Khashoggi before his assassination, and it was one of the most closest confidants. Umar Abdulaziz had his phone infected, and it also potentially exposed that conversation to Saudi intelligence. So this case study demonstrated a pattern. So Pegasus has been repeatedly used outside the boundaries of lawful surveillance with grave consequences for freedom of expressions, democratic engagement, and even with human rights. Let us now shift our focus from the present to the future. A future shaped by an artificial intelligence, encryption, and the evolving nature of surveillance. So first, like the story of Pegasus doesn't end with today's technology. In fact, we are the only at the beginning. The future of surveillance is being shaped by AI, advanced encryption, and quantum computing. So now let's talk about the AI. So it AI enhances surveillance by enabling real-time data processing, facial recognizing, behavioral prediction, and even with emotional analysis. In the context of spyware, AI could soon be used to prioritize which data to extract, whom to surveil, and when to alert the authorities. All is done without the human intervention. This is called the autonomous surveillance, and it raises ethical concerns. Who programs the algorithms, what biases are encoded, and who audits the decisions. So the next slide is about encryption. So next, encryption. Today's encrypted messaging apps like WhatsApp and Signal offer strong protections, but Pegasus sidesteps this by accessing data at the source. It reads messages before they are encrypted or after they have decrypted. This renders end-to-end encryption functionally irrelevant if the device itself is compromised. But the encryption is involving. The cybersecurity world is now preparing for post-quantum encryption. The algorithm also designed to withstand quantum attacks. Why? This is the real question. Because quantum computers once mature could even break traditional encryption in seconds. This creates a new arms race between those building stronger protections and those developing tools to break them. So in this context, a Pegasus is just a preview of for what is to come. Surveillance will become more silent, more efficient, and more predictive. If we don't act now to build ethical and legal frameworks, we risk creating a world where surveillance becomes invincible, automatic, and total. So now we'll tie all this together by examining the broader societal impact, particularly on democracy. So, as we move deeper into the implications of Pegasus, it becomes clear that spyware's effects are not limited to individual rights or isolated legal breaches. The broader and far more dangerous consequence is its systematic impact on democratic institutions. Surveillance technology, when left unchecked, doesn't just threaten privacy, but it can fundamentally erode the fundamental of democracy itself. So let's begin with the concept of press freedom. So, like basically, journalists play a vital role in any democracy by exposing corruption and it hold leaders accountable and inform the public. Where journalists are targeted by spyware like Pegasus, as they have been in India, Mexico, Hungary, and beyond. It sends a chilling message that the source is safe, no conversation is confidential, and no journalist is beyond reach. So now consider the electoral process. In several countries, Pegasus was reportedly used to monitor opposition leaders, electoral strategies, and even election commission officials. When those who challenge power are watched, intimidated, or manipulated through some of the techniques, this isn't just a theoretical concern; it's a real-world threat. So Pegasus also undermines civil societies. NGOs, advocacy groups, and academic researchers often find themselves under the surveillance, especially in authoritarian regimes. Furthermore, the use of Pegasus by governments, often with informing their own legislative bodies, weakens the principle of democratic oversight. This leads to a broader erosion of public trust. When citizens no longer believe that their communication are private or that dissent is safe, they disengage. They stop voting, stop protesting, and stop participating in civic life. The cumulative impact is profound. So Pegasus doesn't just watch; it silences, discourages, and destabilizes. It turns that the tools of security into tools of suppression. If we fail to rein in the misuse, we risk moving from a world of democratic surveillance to surveillance democracy, a system where monitoring becomes the norm and freedom becomes conditional. To prevent this in future, we need bold legal and policy reform. Now let's take a moment to summarize where current legal frameworks stand and what must be done to address these escalating challenges. So, the current legal landscape surrounding commercial spywares like Pegasus is fragmented, outdated, and often ineffective. This slide is a synthesis of the problems we have discussed, a clear snapshot of the regulatory deficiencies that have allowed Pegasus to flourish. First, we have the problem of domestic legal ambiguity. Most countries don't have any explicit laws addressing the purchase or use of commercial surveillance tools. Second is the issue of extraterritorial enforcement. Like Pegasus can be deployed by a foreign entity against a citizen in another country. Yet, there is no international court or treaty that clearly addresses this scenario. Victims have little recourse. Third, there is a lack of vendor accountability. So, NSO Group and similar companies argue that they are not responsible for how their client use their tools, but under international law, especially in the arms trade, it can be held accountable for reckless sales. Fourth, we have inconsistent export controls, like the Wassenaar arrangement, which governs the export of dual-use technologies, is voluntarily and inconsistently applied. Some countries interpret it strictly, others look the other way if the buyer serves strategic interests. And fifth, we have the absence of global governance. So we have treaties for nuclear weapons, chemical warfare, and even climate change. But do we do not have any binding international treaty for spyware? So these gaps are not just legal challenges; they are political policy failures, and they demand urgent reform. So let's now look forward. What can be done? What policies should be enacted to reclaim our sites or and our secure digital features? So, and these are the some in regions in the whole world. In Canada, they have strong privacy laws. It also has weakness, like it has explicit lacks in explicit spyware controls. In the states, they have big, powerful export laws, but they oversight depends on classification. These are the some weakness of in the states. In the EU, they have like a human rights framework, but it weakened in the national agencies that bypass EU rules. And in also UN, they have strong ethical guidance, but they weaken in non-band enforcement. So moving to the policy recommendation, in the light of everything we have discussed, from the technical capabilities of Pegasus to its misuse across continents, it's clear that we need a multi-layered global strategy to regulate surveillance technology. The following recommendations aim to strike a balance between national security that it needs and cyber liberties. So first one is establish a global surveillance treaty. So we need this a binding international treaty. It is akin to the Geneva Convention or the Non-Proliferation Treaty. The second one is some mandatory human rights impact assessment. So before any government or company can deploy or export spyware, they should be required to conduct a published human rights impact assessment. This should include input from independent civil society experts. So third one is judicial oversight and transparency. Like it should never be conducted without judicial approval. Independent review boards must be created to audit the use of spyware and publish public transparency reports. The third one is create a spyware victims redress mechanism. So the victims of unlawful surveillance should have access to legal remedies. So whether through national courts or an international tribunal, there must be a path to justice. So the fifth one is technology design reforms. Spyware vendors must implement technical constraints that limits abuse, and such as you use based locks, kill switches, and strict user authentication. It must be embedded into the product architecture. And the last one is strengthen export controls. All surveillance technology exports must be governed by strict licensing systems with handover verification, ongoing monitoring, and the right to revoke if misuse is detected. So these recommendations aren't just about preventing future abuse, they are about redefining the values that we embedded in technology. So moving to the next slide, these are the some technical solutions I have put in the slide. So investment must not must focus on law surveillance tools that we have built in safeguards. It has also included multi-layer authentication and has audit trails and fail-safe detection if we misused in any of the part. So what are the future digital rights? So if it is both appropriate and essential to acknowledge that the foundational work and investigate efforts that made this research possible, the Pegasus revelation were not the product of a single whistleblower or one isolated journalist. They were uncovered through global collaboration of research labs, human rights organizations, journalists, legal scholars, and international institutions, all of whom who have played vital roles in piecing together the scale and scope of abuse. So, like the future of digital rights also have four. The first one is balance regulation. It creates frameworks that protect both security needs and civil liberties. It also has global cooperation, they develop some of the standards for surveillance technology governance. Third one is international technical safeguards. So it advanced encryption and security measures to protect privacy by design. The fourth one is civil society engagement, like it affects communities have voice in surveillance policy development. So it may well be decided not just in parliaments or courts, but in the code that runs in the backend of our devices. So, Professor, among the most critical sources that I have used in this in my topic Pegasus spyware, so the most critical source and the reference I have took were Citizen Lab. It is based at the University of Toronto, whose forensic investigations were among the first to uncover Pegasus. The second one I have used is Amnesty International Security Lab, which validate infections and publish detailed technical reports. The third one I have used is the collaborative work of the Pegasus project, a consortium coordinated by the Forbidden Stories, and it involves around 80 journalists from 17 media organizations across 10 countries. The fourth one is legal documentation and public statements from Apple and Meta, and filing in the US and European courts that helped to frame the legal case against NSO Group. I have also used international law references, including the International Convention on Civil and Political Rights, also from United Nations GDPR and the Wassenaar arrangement documents. The last one I have used that the policy recommendation and ongoing reports from the UN, particularly the offices of the UN Special Rapporteurs on freedom of expression and privacy. So the final insight I leave you with this: the research doesn't solve with injustice, but when research is combined with transparency, advocacy, and collectively actions, it becomes a force for system change. Pegasus is a tool, but its impact is a product of human choices. It was built, sold, deployed, and abused, all under the radar of accountability. It was used not only to chase criminals, but to silence journalists, monitor activities, and intimidate opposition. And that should concern every one of us. In closing, the Pegasus spyware scandal is not just case in cyber intrusion. It is a mirror that reflects the cracks in our legal system and the fragility of our ethical standards and the vulnerability of our democratic institution. So, thank you, Professor, for your valuable time, and I hope that my topic and my research is well aligned with your requirements. And thank you once again. Bye bye.